She didn't divorce me, she robbed me, legally. My name is Jack Turner, I'm 42 years old, a mechanic and part-time farmer in rural Missouri. I've only believed in two things my entire life: hard work and trust. Hard work, I had plenty of. Trust, I gave it all to the one person I shouldn't have, my wife. I met Emily when I was 25. She walked into my garage with a busted Honda and a smile that made me forget the overdue power bill. We fell fast, married quick, and built a life on a small farm my uncle left me, nestled in a quiet green valley far from the noise of the city. I thought it was a home. She saw it as a stepping stone. That evening I came home late from the shop. A busted axle on an old truck had kept me under the lift for hours. When I stepped into the kitchen, something felt off. No scent of cornbread, no country music playing on the radio, just a brown envelope placed perfectly in the center of our dinner table, silent, still, and deliberate like a verdict. I wiped my hands and opened it. Inside were three things. 1, a bank statement, joint account balance, $27 for fee. 2, a land sale contract, sellers, Jack and Emily Turner. 3, a handwritten letter, neat as the holiday cards she used to write. Jack, I'm sorry it had to come to this. Wallace and I have been planning for a while. I know this is cruel, but I need a different life. Please don't try to reach me. Emily. Wallace. That name hit like a hammer. Emily's boss. A twice-divorced investor known for sustainable agriculture ventures that nobody in town actually believed in. I'd invited him to dinner once. Emily said he supported small farms. He'd sat in the very chair I built with my own hands, praised Emily's roast chicken, called me a solid man. He left by 9 p.m. Emily washed the dishes. I took out the trash. 3 months later, she sold our farm, drained our account, and erased my name from everything that ever mattered. I ran to the office. The file cabinet was empty. Deeds, loan papers, insurance documents, all gone. I called Emily. No answer. Called the bank. They told me the account had been emptied 2 weeks ago. I looked up the property record. Transfer finalized 3 days ago. She did it all quietly, legally. Every document had my forged signature. I stepped onto the porch, looking out at what used to be my world. The cornfields glowed gold in the setting sun, beautiful and cruel, like a goodbye I never got to say. That land, it was where I buried my uncle, where I scraped my knuckles fixing fences, where Emily once said, I want our kids to grow up here. Now it belonged to someone else. And me? I had a brown envelope, a bit of grease on my hands, and nothing left to hold on to. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there, watching my hands tremble, like they'd somehow let go of everything I once called mine. I sat alone in the garage. The overhead light flickered like it wasn't sure if it wanted to stay on anymore. The ticking of the clock echoed across the space like it was counting down the remains of a life that had just been torn apart. And then the memories began to replay, not as moments of nostalgia, but as damning evidence I'd once ignored. The first time was when Emily started working late twice a week. She said the school had added evening classes and needed extra support. I believed her. Hell, I even encouraged her. I remember making her coffee before she left, kissing her on the forehead and saying, "They're lucky to have you." The second time was when she changed how she dressed. Silk blouses, pencil skirts, heels, things an elementary teacher in rural Missouri didn't usually wear. I joked, "Are you teaching or heading to a fashion shoot?" She laughed, just trying to look more professional. And again, I believed her. Then came the late returns, the mood swings, the nights she fell asleep on the couch, distant and irritable. I cooked, I cleaned, I rubbed her feet, and I told myself, she's just tired, she's working too hard. I didn't question her when she handed me a set of papers one evening, asking me to sign. "Farm refinancing," she said. I asked, "Are we in trouble?" She shook her head. "No, just a bank formality. Needs both signatures." I didn't read it. I signed. That That might have been the land sale contract. There was the dinner with Wallace. He complimented her lasagna, asked me, "Ever thought about expanding the farm into something bigger?" I laughed and said, "I didn't build this land to turn it into a spreadsheet." Emily was quiet that night. I asked if she was okay. She nodded. "You go ahead and sleep." I had no idea who she texted after I went to bed. No idea that while I was dreaming about harvest season, she was dreaming about a future that didn't include me. I used to think I was practical, that working hard, being honest, and loving fully would be enough to keep what mattered safe. But if the person beside you decided to walk away long ago, your loyalty becomes dead weight. I remember when she asked me not to call her during work anymore. I remember walking in once and catching her smiling at a text, only to hide the phone the moment she saw me. I remember asking, "Is there something you want to tell me?" She replied, "Nothing, you're overthinking." No, I wasn't. I was just too afraid to look truth in the eye. Every disconnected moment now clicked into place, like gears in an engine that had just exploded. And I was the guy behind the wheel, not realizing I'd driven off a cliff months ago. I looked up at our wedding photo still hanging on the garage wall. Emily in her white dress, me in a rented tux, hand in hand, grinning like we had the world ahead of us. Back then, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. Now, all I had left were two oil-stained hands and a name she'd sold off behind my back. But somewhere deep inside, a voice cut through the numbness, calm, cold, and razor-sharp. "You won't let her take anything else, not even your silence." I didn't call Emily again. No texts, no public posts, no shouting, no searching, no begging. I'm old enough to understand that what's truly gone won't return just because you beg for it. I cleaned the garage in silence. Every wrench went back in its place. Every oil stain was wiped clean. I needed order because inside me everything was chaos. For 2 weeks, I told no one what happened. I kept fixing cars, changing oil, handing out invoices, but at night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen staring at a photocopy of the land sale contract I got from the bank. The signature, forged. The sale price, well below market value. The buyer, a shell company tied to Wallace. She hadn't just left. She'd planned a robbery, and I'd unknowingly handed her the keys. I thought that was rock bottom. But then one morning I received a letter from the bank. "Please note, your collateralized assets are currently under review as part of an ongoing investigation into suspicious transactions. If you have information, contact legal representation immediately." That's when I realized this wasn't just a loss. It was a trap. Wallace didn't just want the land. He wanted to turn me into the loser, the one left behind, the one crushed. He wanted me humiliated, not just by loss, but by law, by silence, by the helplessness of being erased. So I called someone I never thought I'd call in my life, Sarah Chen, one of the top divorce and asset protection lawyers in the state. She listened to me talk for 20 minutes, didn't interrupt. When I was done, she asked me one thing: "Do you have any proof?" I nodded. "I will." I began digging, old emails, bank logs. I went to the notary's office to request certified copies. I contacted the real estate broker. I pulled up the public land transfer record. I started logging every lie Emily had told me, every time Wallace showed up, every odd transaction, like I was dismantling a blown engine. Nothing was random. They planned everything. But I used to be the guy who could rebuild a V8 that other mechanics gave up on. I knew how things worked, even when they were broken. One night I met Mike, my oldest friend who runs the diner down the street. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know you're hurting, but you also know this can't be how it ends. You don't need revenge, Jack. You just need the truth back." That night, I didn't sleep. I made a list. Assets lost, documents to retrieve, witnesses to contact, what I had left. Not much, but not zero. I still had my hands, my mind, and a reason not to go down easy. They thought I'd break, but they forgot. I'm not the kind of man who folds after one punch. I'm the kind who rebuilds a house brick by brick out of the same stones they tried to bury me with. Sarah wasn't what I expected a top lawyer to look like. No fancy talk, no power poses. She wore black-rimmed glasses, hair tied back, sat with perfect posture, and had a stare that made you double-check your own truth before speaking. After I finished telling her everything, she didn't ask, "Are you sure?" She asked only one thing, "How far are you willing to go?" I answered, "As far as they've pushed me." And so we began. Sarah started the case file. She asked me to gather everything: old contracts, emails, transaction receipts, log-in histories for our joint accounts. I went through every drawer, every digital backup I had, and found our first break, an email from Wallace to Emily, subject line, "Final draft, keep private." I forwarded it to Sarah. She read it and said only one word: rotten. I didn't get it at first. She clarified, "There are two types of divorces in this business. One is about dividing property. The other is about exposing fraud. We're in the second type." We followed the money. Sarah pulled in a financial forensics expert. Together they uncovered a hidden bank account Emily had opened 6 months ago, in a different state, under both our names. From that account, large withdrawals were made over time, thousands at a time, each with a vague label. I asked, "How did she get it under my name?" Sarah replied, "She used your information to open it. If we can prove that, it's a criminal offense." Sarah also reached out to the notary office where Emily had supposedly signed the land sale with me. I went there with her. We requested surveillance footage from the date of signing. The video was crystal clear. Only Emily and a man in a suit were present. He wasn't me. A forged signature, a fake witness, and a transaction funneled to a company under Wallace's name. Sarah didn't react. She calmly noted the timestamp, copied the file, and said, "We have a witness, a video, and a motive. This is no longer a divorce case. It's asset fraud." While the court set a hearing date, I kept working at the garage during the day. At night, I did something else. I dismantled my own past. I checked Emily's old laptop, something she left behind like it meant nothing. Inside, I found a spreadsheet titled Farm Projections. Rows of figures calculating land value, Wallace's proposed investment plans, and a column titled Strategy to Remove Jack Cleanly. I read every line. I remembered telling Emily once, "We don't have to be rich. Just enough to live without debt is fine." She'd nodded. Now I knew that nod was a lie. A week before the trial, Sarah called me to her office. She handed me the final version of our case file, complete with documents, video evidence, and legal strategy. I looked at her and asked, "What are the odds?" She didn't smile, didn't sugarcoat. She just said, "They'll be forced to face a judge, and this time you get to tell the story." I left her office walking lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I'd forgiven anything, but because I finally found a way to take my voice back. Not by raising it, but by letting truth speak for me. Boone County Courthouse, 8:45 a.m. I sat in the front row on the right side, eyes straight ahead, hands folded, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I had come too far to turn back, and I had nothing left to lose. Emily entered with her lawyer. She wore a dark dress, light makeup, eyes fixed forward. She didn't look at me. The same woman who once held my hand to co-sign our first loan now avoided my gaze, like it burned. Wallace followed behind her in a pale gray suit, his expression cool, like he was attending a board meeting. I didn't nod. Neither did they. There was no need. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After reading a brief of the case, he looked toward Sarah. "The plaintiff may proceed." Sarah walked up calmly, as if she already knew every creak in the courtroom floor. No raised voice, no dramatic words, just facts, delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the weight of truth. "We are not merely requesting a fair division of assets, Your Honor. We are requesting the court to examine a coordinated act of financial fraud. Evidence will show forged signatures, unauthorized use of identity, concealed asset transfers, and unlawful land sale. And we have proof. I glanced at Emily then. For the first time in over a month, she looked back at me. Her eyes weren't defiant anymore. They held doubt and fear. Sarah submitted the first exhibit, a hidden bank account opened by Emily using my personal information. Then came the security footage from the notary's office, the place where I had supposedly signed away our farm. Then the spreadsheet titled Farm Projections, found on Emily's laptop. And finally, the emails from Wallace. Emily's attorney immediately objected, claiming the evidence was unclear, private, inadmissible. The judge dismissed all objections. Every item was entered into the record. When the video played, the one from the notary office, the courtroom went dead silent. There, in full HD, was a man in a suit, pretending to be me. And next to him, plain as day, Emily signing the documents. Wallace shifted slightly in his seat, the first crack in his indifference. Emily stared down at the floor. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat, because here, I didn't need to shout. The truth was already doing it for me. After the first round of testimony, the judge called for a break before cross-examination. Sarah turned to me and said quietly, "They'll try to twist the story. They'll spin it however they can. But don't worry, we don't need a better story. We just need the right one." I nodded, not because I was sure we'd win, but because for the first time in months, I knew I was on the right side of the fight. The courtroom was tense, air heavy, like it carried the weight of every lie ever told. Wallace took the stand. He adjusted his tie, slipped a hand in his pocket, and spoke with the calm of a man who'd talked his way out of worse. I had no involvement in Emily's personal decisions. I simply offered to support a small agricultural investment. The rest was between her and her husband. He sounded like a bystander, as if he'd wandered into someone else's mess. Sarah stood, slow and steady. She walked to the evidence table and opened the final folder. "Your Honor, we present a chain of internal emails between Wallace and Emily, specifically discussions on how to transfer the farmland quietly and convert personal holdings into corporate assets to avoid marital property claims." The room went still, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Included are bank records, a $50,000 transfer from Wallace to a shell company in Delaware 3 weeks before the land sale, and an email that reads, 'Settle it before Jack finds out. Keep it quiet.'" Wallace paled. Emily looked down, and I didn't flinch, because I had no need to scream anymore. The truth was louder than anything I could have said. The judge leaned forward. "There appears to be sufficient evidence to warrant criminal inquiry. The civil case will proceed, but I'm referring all fraudulent activities for separate investigation." Emily's lawyer leaned in close, whispering urgently. Her hands trembled. She was no longer the composed woman who'd walked into the courtroom that morning. She was someone watching the life she built on lies collapse, brick by brick. And then Emily broke. She didn't cry to seek pity. She cried because she realized it was over. Between gasps, she said, I didn't think he'd find out. I thought he'd break." I stood, not in anger, but because in that moment I knew I'd already won, not just legally. I'd won because she was finally looking straight at the damage she caused. The judge banged his gavel. "This court orders the full return of all misappropriated assets to Mr. Jack Turner. Civil trial concluded. All fraudulent activity will be passed to the state attorney's office for further prosecution." I walked out past Wallace. He was slumped on the bench, head down, phone buzzing. Probably the press, investors, lawyers, the empire he built on charm and deceit. It was cracking. Emily sat a few feet away, her face wet, her eyes hollow, her shoulders small. She looked up at me as if waiting for something. A word, a sign, anything, but I kept walking. She had made her choice. Now she would live with it. Outside the courthouse, the sky was unusually clear. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight on my chest. 3 weeks after the trial, I returned to the farm. The land hadn't changed. The patchy grass in front of the porch was still burnt in spots. The old barn still had that one crooked door, only I was different now. I stood in the yard, running my hand across the weathered wood of the cattle gate, the one where I'd once hung a sign that said, Turner Family Farm, handmade from sheet metal. That sign was gone. Emily probably took it down long ago. I didn't rush to fix anything. I just walked the fields, not to check for crops, but to get reacquainted with the soil, with the wind, with myself. The first few days I barely spoke to anyone. I got up at dawn and worked until the sun dipped behind the hills. I rebuilt the old sign, repainted the fences, cleaned out the shed. I hired no one, not because I couldn't afford to, but because I needed to touch every nail, every board with my own hands, to know that I could still build something, even after being torn down. At night I sat on the porch with a glass of cold water, listening to the bugs and the quiet. No radio, no phone, just a man, alive after the storm, learning how to stand again. One late afternoon, Mike, my old friend from the diner, showed up. He looked around the yard and gave a low whistle. "Didn't think you'd fix it up this fast." I smiled. Not the tight, forced smile I'd worn for months. A real one. Small, but real. He handed me a cold beer and sat on the porch step beside me. "So, what now?" "I live," I said, "and I don't let the past write the rest of my story." I told him about the idea that had been quietly forming in my mind, to open a free auto repair workshop for struggling teens, dropouts, kids with minor records, the kind no one gives a second chance. I've got 2 hands and a head that still knows engines. What I didn't have once was opportunity. I don't want these kids to grow up without one. Mike didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on my shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. The next morning, I began clearing out the large barn behind the house. I moved equipment over from the old garage, bought a few used tool sets, hung up a small sign by the gate. Free auto repair lessons for youth who need a second chance. Not everyone came, but a few weeks later I had 3 kids. One was 17, once arrested for stealing a scooter, another got expelled for fighting, and one never said a word the entire first session, just stared at me as I took apart an engine like it was the only truth left in the world. I didn't ask about their pasts. I just taught them how to hold a wrench, how to read a diagram, how to repair without breaking, and slowly, silently, I was learning how to piece my own life back together. The garage behind the farm no longer looked like a place for broken engines. It had become something else, a classroom, a second chance. The kids who once walked in with guarded eyes were now more at ease. They called me Mr. Jack, half teasing, half sincere. Some were talkative, others quiet, but every time they tightened a bolt properly, their eyes lit up like they'd just fixed the world. I wasn't teaching them to be great mechanics. I was teaching them patience, teaching them how to look at something broken and believe, with enough care, it could be fixed. That's something I didn't learn from any book. I learned it from the wreckage I'd crawled out of. One afternoon, I let the newest kid, a boy who'd run away from juvenile detention, take apart an old engine block. His hands trembled. He stripped a bolt, snapped it. I didn't yell. I looked at him and asked, "Want to try again?" He nodded. "Good, then start from the top, but this time, don't be afraid to get it wrong." I realized in that moment, I wasn't just speaking to him, I was talking to myself. Every time they messed up, I thought of everything I'd lost, and every time they got it right, I thought of what I'd regained. Faith, not in the past, but in the future. That little garage slowly became part of the town. Once a month, someone would stop by, ask for a quick checkup on their car, and leave a note that read, "Thank you for doing this." I never asked them to pay. All I wanted was for these kids to know someone believed in them. One day, I received a letter from the state prosecutor's office. Wallace had been formally indicted on 3 counts of fraud. Emily, unofficial sources said, had sold off her company shares and left the state. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, not with triumph, not with bitterness, just closure. On a cool fall morning, I was wiping grease off my hands when the quietest boy in the group, the one who'd never called me Mr. Jack, came over. "I fixed the spark plug," he said. "Good job," I replied. He hesitated, then asked, "Can I come back tomorrow?" I looked at him, a kid no one wanted, no one trusted, standing there asking if there was still a place for him. I nodded. "This garage never closes its doors to anyone who wants to fix themselves." He smiled for the first time, and so did I. 3 years later, the garage behind the farmhouse was still there. Same rusted roof, same weathered wooden walls. The hand-painted sign I once hung was fading, a few letters peeling off with time. But inside, everything had changed. We had 12 students, though I never called them that. They were kids who'd once been labeled broken, troublemakers, throwaways. Now they knew how to change oil, read engine diagrams, back off when they over-tightened, and say, "I messed up, but I want to try again." I still lived in the old wooden house, the same one that had seen both my happiest and most devastating days. But I didn't see it as a reminder of what I lost anymore. Now it was just a foundation for something new. Every morning I got up at 6, made coffee, opened the garage doors, and waited. Some of the kids walked, some got dropped off by tired moms. Others rode up on beat-up bicycles. I never asked where they came from. I only cared if they were ready to learn that day. One rainy afternoon, the roof leaked in 4 different places. Buckets, towels, a scramble of limbs, and laughter. One kid joked, "This place feels more like a shelter than a school." I grinned. "Yeah, but it's the kind of shelter that keeps you out of juvie." They got it. This wasn't just a place to learn trades. It was where people unwanted elsewhere came to start again. I don't think about Emily much anymore. No one in town brings her up. From what I heard, through someone who knew someone, she moved out of state after the trial. Quiet life. Low profile. Wallace. He made the news a few more times, more investigations, more legal trouble, then disappeared from the investor circuit completely. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. Strangely, I didn't feel hurt anymore either, because I'd come to understand something. Sometimes the greatest punishment is having to live with yourself. Me? I live with what I build, with engines that run again after breaking down, with boys who used to think they were worthless, now applying for jobs, going back to school, or coming back to help me teach the younger ones. One day, I was showing my first batch of students, now assistants, how to pull a cylinder head when a man walked in, middle-aged, neat button-down shirt, hesitant eyes. "You, Jack Turner?" "That's me." He introduced himself as a social worker from a neighboring town, said he'd heard about our program, said he had a few teens who were slipping through the cracks, said he wanted to collaborate. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the garage. The sound of laughter, the clang of metal, the misfire of an engine trying to turn over, and then I nodded. That evening, when the sun dropped behind the hills, I stood on my porch. The horizon glowed a soft purple. Behind me, the garage hummed faintly with life. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because finally, I no longer saw myself as the victim of a past I didn't choose. I was the main character in a new story, one where I chose to forgive myself, chose to rebuild, chose to believe there's no engine too broken to fix, as long as you still want to try.